The story of Rahab is not the story of Rahab alone, brothers and sisters. It's also the story of two spies. One in particular, I believe, was named Salmon, who was inspired by her faith to the point that he married her. But irrespective of that, it's clear that the two spies were astonished and amazed by her faith. And whether Salmon was one of the spies or not, it's obvious that before he and Rahab were married, they were on opposite sides. On opposing nations to begin with. She was a Canaanite, he was an Israelite. They worshipped opposing gods. They were on opposite sides of the walls of Jericho. She was inside, he was outside. Yet they came together as husband and wife, professing the same beliefs, the same values, and the same love for God. But make no mistake, brothers and sisters. The reason she was able to marry Salmon being from the tribe of Judah, was all instigated by her. She is the one that seeks a solution to the challenging situation she and her family were in. She was the one that reached out and ultimately brought a successful answer to the impending destruction that they faced, and she did it because of her astounding faith. Now, the story starts with Israel camped along the eastern banks of the Jordan River at the end of the 40 years of wandering, you remember, and they're about to cross over. The time had finally come to enter the land of promise, the land that flowed with milk and honey. But here's the thing. Around the same time, but before you can possess it, you first have to drive out the inhabitants of the land. So they're about to cross over. Well, what do these inhabitants look like? Where do they live? How prepared are they? What's their state of mind? Because it had been 38 years since any Israelite had ever been in that territory. Remember, a scout party 38 years ago had been sent to take a general look of the land and to report back to Moses. And there were 12 on that first occasion, one from each tribe. And they went scouting around the land and they came back with their report in Numbers 13. And this was their report. They came back saying, there's too many inhabitants. There's so many. They are so strong, they said. Too strong for us. They live in these walled cities. And they have a family of giants even living there. We can't go up. Now, all of that was actually true, wasn't it? But God had told Abraham that when the iniquity of the Amorite was full, then he would drive them out and displace them. So the thing that these spies should have been looking out for was the behavior and the morality of these inhabitants, not their number or their size. But of course, they didn't do that. But you know, around the same time, 38 years ago, when that the Israelite scout party was sent out into Canaan and they came back with their disastrous conclusions, over in Jericho, there was a family discussing things that they had heard of the news of the defeat of the greatest army of the day, Pharaoh of Egypt's army, no less. In of all places, they were at the bottom of the Red Sea, and had been accomplished by this motley crew of slaves. And this little family discussed these events, and they went on to give birth to a little girl. They named her Rahab. And they continued to talk about these strange tales of the mighty Israelite slaves, leaving Egypt via miraculous parting of the Red Sea after 10 horrific plagues that tore the Egyptian society and economy to shreds and drowned much of their once mighty army. And these words sank deep into the mind of this little girl. She wondered about them. She thought about how incredible it was for water to part like that. Maybe she tried to recreate the scene in the bathtub or in the washing pot of water and was never able to succeed pushing the water apart. And she wondered about the God that could control water. Her life went on and she grew up. And for whatever reason, financial challenges, lack of opportunities, she became a prostitute. It does seem she also made linen fabric out of flax. She had that up on her rooftop, but perhaps that wasn't enough to cover expenses. She was probably quite beautiful, and one thing led to another, and before she knew it, she was the owner and operator of an inn-type operation with temporary accommodation for travellers who were predominantly men. But even though her life took this seedy turn, deep in her heart was still the memory from all those years ago about the God who turned water into blood, filled a whole land with flies or locusts or lice, brought darkness for 24 hours, controlled water, made walls out of water, actually. It's often the way that when one gets into the gutter of depravity, thinking they'll find the answers to life's happiness, that's when they find out how meaningless life is, how hollow it is, how utterly despairing it is. And she would have thought about what might lie beyond this helplessness and hark back in her mind to the stories of the God that could control water, who delivered wretched slaves from the most powerful army around. And she wondered, where are those slaves now? And then one day, news came through that the two powerful armies on the other side of Jordan had been destroyed, King Sihon and King Og. And she had inquired, who destroyed them? They're saying it was the Israelite slaves of Egypt that have now emerged out of the desert. They've taken over the whole of the eastern bank. And they say that we're next. And Rahab's mind started whirring all over again. And she knew she had to make a decision, a choice. Her time was running out. And she'd endeavoured to find out as much as was possible about the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan. Any information that their Canaanite spies dared to glean, she wanted to know about their leaders, about Moses, the older one, and about this new one, Joshua, who's about to take over. What have they been saying? Well, now Joshua is in charge. And 38 years after the first spies came to Rahab's land, and they probably never went inside a walled city, they probably never saw Rahab's family, Joshua is reflecting on the report that came back on that occasion, and he doesn't want a repeat. He knows that God had given them the land. He was one of the two faithful spies that came back with a good report, wasn't he? And it deeply saddens him to think that they could have already been in the land for at least 38 years. But, well, here we are. God will give us this land. There's no need to search it all out again. Having said that, it's a poor leader who doesn't do their research good enough or is underprepared for the task ahead. So Joshua knows Jericho is the first city to take, and he knows it's a walled city. It's got huge gates. It's got soldiers manning it day and night. There's lots of archers, lots of swordsmen. He knows all that. He saw it last time. What he doesn't know is the morale of the inhabitants. How focused are they? How prepared are they? Are they expecting an attack? Are they prepared for that attack? Are they confident? These are things that are not observable from a distance, and so it would take men getting up close and personal to the inhabitants of the city. So he chooses two men. Now, come to chapter 6, first of all. In chapter 6, verse 23, we're told that they're young men. See verse 23, and the young men that were the spies went in. So these were young men. So they're strong men, okay? They had to be. They had to swim across the flooded Jordan for a start. That would take some doing. But in addition to being strong men, they had to be spiritually strong as well. They had to have faithful convictions. Joshua wanted men he could trust. Why was that important? We'll come back to chapter 2 of Joshua. This is where our story is found regarding Rahab. And in Joshua chapter 2, verse 1, it says, Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly. Shittim. Why mention Shittim? We're not told about Shittim once in the whole of Deuteronomy. We're not told in chapter 1. The record waits till here to tell us. Do you know the last time that Shittim is mentioned? You have to go all the way back to Numbers 33. It's where they wandered, and the last place they came to was Abel Shittim. What happened at Shittim, brothers and sisters, in those plains of Moab? Well, it's that horrible incident when the daughters of Moab seduced many men, young and old, in Israel's camp under the counsel of Balaam. And of course, 24,000 died. And that's fresh in their minds. That only just happened a few months ago. These 2 men played no part of that, which was just as well, because these 2 men were going to end up in the house of a harlot. And it's my belief that one of these two men was Salmon. And it strikes me that even though Rahab was saved, it was still going to take a lot for her to be accepted into a family in Israel, let alone marry any of them. It'll be the same issue for Ruth in our next story. We'll see this. A Gentile might come into the hope of Israel, but to marry a Gentile, well, that's quite unthinkable. But if you, as a young man, saw firsthand such incredible faith in such a challenging manner as when your life depended on it, you could see past all the racial differences. You would see past the previous lifestyle. You would see past all that to the heart and soul of this woman. Now remember that it's these same two spies that were instructed to find Rahab after the walls fell down in chapter 6. And you can imagine the tension. Was she still alive? Did she obey our instructions? Did God preserve her? Look, there she is. God did keep her alive. Her faith did save her. And that would have had a monumental effect on those two men. And more than enough, I think, to cause one of them to have complete confidence in marrying her. The wonderful, faithful woman, Rahab. But we're jumping a little bit ahead. Come back to chapter 2 and verse 2. Because in verse 2, or verse 1 and 2, Joshua gives instructions to the young men to go view the land, but specifically Jericho. They went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab, and they lodged there. The reasons for going there was to lodge, and you'll see in the margin against the word lodge, it means to lay down, to sleep. They planned to stay for one night. Verse 8 tells us, before they laid down, ere they went to sleep, it says in the margin. And yet verse 2 and 3 says, for all their disguise and careful planning, the young men were immediately noticed by the city's gatekeepers, and they followed the men to Rahab's house. And word got back to the king in a flash, and a search party was sent out. Even Rahab detected who the men were as soon as they entered the house. She knew, just straight off. You see, this was the very thing Joshua wanted to know, isn't it? But it's clear that neither Joshua or the spies were aware of just how alert this city was. They were on tenterhooks. The whole city was on code red. And upstairs come the soldiers, and they start banging on her door, and the moment of truth had come for Rahab. She had to choose. She'd been thinking about it a lot, but now she had to make a split-second decision to act on what she'd been thinking or to back down and capitulate. Verse 4 says, and the woman took the two men and hid them. She opened the door and her mouth would have dropped. She knew exactly who these men were, and she saw the gatekeepers just around the corner peering, and she knew exactly what the situation was, so she shut the door. She said, shh, follow me, up quickly. And she took the two men upstairs and hid them under the flags. And no sooner had she hid them, the banging started, and she had seconds to get her story ready. She must have put on a good act. Because it was so convincing that the soldiers never searched the house. They swallowed her story. Yes, they came here, she says, but I didn't know what sort of men they were. Well, she clearly did, didn't she? The men left at dark. Well, no, they hadn't at all. I don't know where they went. She hid them on the rooftop. She knows exactly. If you're quick, you might still catch them. Well, they're not out there at all. Deliberately sent them on a wild goose chase. This was treason, brothers and sisters. This was punishable by death. She had betrayed her people. She had switched allegiances to the enemy. Her reaction is actually very different to other records where a crowd gathered outside the door demanding two men to be brought out. You might think of Genesis 19 and Judges 19. And of course, on those occasions, women were offered to appease the men. And no doubt Rahab could have done that and bribed her way out of the story, out of the situation in this story. But it's obvious that she's showing her true colours now. Her heart lay with the God of the Israelites. Now, much has been said about Rahab's lies. I don't want to enter into the controversy. I'm just going to say this. Scripture makes a great gulf between those who lie to protect others, like the Hebrew midwives, or David and Doeg, or Jael and Sisera, or Ehud and Eglon, and lying to protect or promote yourself. The serpent in the Garden of Eden, Abraham about his wife, Joseph's brothers, which we saw yesterday, Ananias and Sapphira. Two distinct groups. Just interesting to know how hiding God's people has happened on many occasions, and I'm sure things were said to try and distract those looking from finding them in these places. So I'm just going to leave it at that and leave it for you to decide what you think about Rahab's lies. I'm just putting it as a suggestion without falling on one side or the other. Well, of course, in verse 9, she opens her mouth and out it all comes. Verse 8, and before they were laid down, she came up upon the roof. Now, she hid the men on her roof under that flax that was drying out. Now, it's for this action that Rahab is found in the Annals of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Right alongside Abraham, no less. And there are only two women mentioned in the Annals of Faith in Hebrews 11. Did you know that? Well, Sarah's there. Well, of course she's there. You'd expect her to be there, the Jewish mother of the nation. And Rahab, a Gentile mother, right alongside a Jewish mother. She received the spies with peace. Hebrews 11 verse 31 says that was the reason for her faith. So what that's telling you is that when those spies come, she didn't scream and say, they're here. I can tell you exactly where they are. You know, a little bit like Potiphar's wife. I'm being attacked, help. She received them in peace. Note the thing she did. She gave them lodgings, food, drink, shelter, probably warm clothes too. They just swum across the Jordan, all right? She took them in and stopped them from certain imprisonment. Can you hear an echo there? Think of the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. I was hungry, you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. Naked, you clothed me. I was in prison, you visited me, or you helped me from going to prison. Inasmuch as you have done it to these, the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. That's why she's in Hebrews 11, in a nutshell. Well, after sending the soldiers off, she races back upstairs to speak with these men, and her heart's bursting, isn't it? She's got so much to say. She can't believe that the God who controlled water has let two men come to her house. And she has been building up all of this for some time. And out it all comes in verse 9. Verse 9 to 11, brothers and sisters, would have to be one of the greatest confessions of faith in all Scripture. This is monumental. Our title for our talk today is Rahab Displaying Our Faith. What sort of faith should we have? This sort of faith. Look what she opens with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the screen and we're going to go through some of those things slowly. Just look up on the screen and find them as we go along. Look what she opens with. She says, I know that Yahweh hath given you this land. It doesn't say, I'm guessing he has or I'm hoping he has. I know he has. There's a whole generation just on the other side of Jordan, over the age of 20, who perished in the burning desert of Kadesh Barnea because they didn't know. They didn't believe. And it's not might give or is likely to give. It's hath given. That's past tense. She called those things that be not as though they are. Romans 4, verse 17. How did she know? Well, we'll just go to another slide for a moment and then go back to that one. Probably from the snippets of reports of the words of Moses said just months earlier. Book of Deuteronomy, all said in 1 month, just a little bit earlier. And in Deuteronomy, this idea of giving comes all the way through. Go in and possess the land, God told Moses. And Moses is now telling the nation in chapter 1, verse 8, 6, verse 23, 10, verse 11. Go up and possess the land which I have given you. 8, verse 10, 9, verse 23, 26, verse 9. Moses has been saying this for a whole month. Has she heard some of that in the reports coming back? I don't know. But she knows, doesn't she? She knows the promises to Abraham, because that's exactly what was promised to Abraham. Unto thy seed will I give this land. And go through the story of Abraham. You'll find it all over, chapter 12, 13, 15, and 17. God will give you this land. It's remarkable, isn't it? This is her confession. She knows Yahweh's name. He's not just the God of Israel. He's Yahweh, the God of Israel. And then she says in verse 9, all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. This word faint, you'll see in the margin, it means to melt. All right, a bit like snow melting away. It just goes away. This is exactly what God had promised. Now, Rahab probably didn't know this, but the two spies would have, because there was an incident that their fathers and their mothers were involved with crossing the River Jordan, where Moses sung a song. It's called the Song of Moses in Exodus 15, verse 15 and 16. In that song, Moses said, all the inhabitants of Canaan, specifically Canaan, shall melt away. Imagine being one of the spies listening to this. Verse 10, she says, for we have heard. We've heard all the reports about you, she says. And she mentions two in particular. But it's obvious that she's choosing these two because they are the bookends of Israel's history since leaving Egypt. She mentions these two. The first one is from the drying up of the Red Sea 40 years ago. It's probably before Rahab was even born. She was told that by her parents. And then the next one she mentions happened only a few months ago, the destruction of Sihon and Og. I know all about you from beginning to end. It's all based on what she had heard. She wasn't there. She hadn't seen it. She didn't see them come out of Egypt. She heard these reports. Faith comes by hearing, doesn't it? And she'd thought long and hard about all of this, and she'd come to the one and only conclusion. And so she says in verse 11, as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt. That's the second time she said that. Neither did there remain any courage in you, in any man, because of you. For Yahweh your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. What's that saying, brothers and sisters? It's saying that she can't see how any other God can fit into the picture anywhere. Your God fills heaven and earth. There are no other gods. Yahweh is the only one. Now, whether she knew it or not, but again, the spies would have known, she was quoting Moses again. Not from the song of Moses 40 years ago, but from the speech of Moses only months ago. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 39, Moses says, know therefore this day and consider it in thine heart that Yahweh, he is God in heaven above and upon earth beneath, there is none else. She's saying exactly that. That's an outstanding confession of faith, isn't it, brothers and sisters? But then without taking a breath, she launches into a passionate request. She wants security. Now, note who she wants the security for. It's not for herself. It's for her family. All this is because she wanted to save her family. That's what drove her. She never says, save me. Have a look at verse 12. Now, therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by Yahweh, since I've showed you kindness, that you will show kindness unto my father's house. Verse 13, and that you will save alive my father, my mother, my brethren, and my sisters, and all that they have. Never once about herself, is it? I want to save my family. She was thoughtful of others. And the proof that she was thoughtful for others is in the way she cared for the two spies, isn't it? In verse 12, as we just read, she said, swear unto me by Yahweh. Note her total lack of confidence in any of her own gods. She didn't use her own gods to make a promise or ask for a promise. Make an oath to me in Yahweh's name. Again, she's applying the words that Moses said in Deuteronomy chapter 6 in regards to making an oath. That's how you do it. You have to do it in Yahweh's name. Since I have showed you kindness, the word kindness is the Hebrew word chesed. It's the word that sums up all of God's mercy and care and love and goodness. It's one of the foundation pillars of God's character, chesed. Please show me that same kindness and give me a true token. True token. That word true is the Hebrew word emeth. That's the other side of God's character. That sums up everything about God's righteousness, his truth. These are the two pillars of his character. Truth and love. One's dealing with the head, logic. One's dealing with the heart, emotions. That's the whole man. God wants us to model ourselves on him in our head and in our heart. And she's using these two words here. And you can go all through the Bible and find similar words that fit under those two columns. That's God's character. He perfectly balances his truth with his love. It's all through Scripture. These lovely verses in the Psalms talk about mercy and truth meeting together in God. And here's these spies listening to all of this. What would you say to all of that, brothers and sisters? How could you answer that? Verse 14, the men answered her. Their mouth would have been on the floor, wouldn't it? They weren't expecting this. And you look at the other spy, his mouth's on the floor as well. This is incredible. They quickly recover and then they speak because they're so moved by her faith. They say in verse 14, our life for yours, if you utter not this, our business. Oh, wow. We're prepared to die instead of you if we don't fulfill this promise. See what the two spies are doing? They're declaring their faith now, aren't they? She's just confessed her faith. Now they're declaring their faith in God. If anything was to happen to Rahab's family, then they were prepared to die for it. Much like Judah in our last story yesterday was prepared to die for Benjamin. Verse 14 says, and it shall be when Yahweh hath given us this land that we will deal, note this, kindly and truly with you. They used the same two words that she just used. Kindly and truly. If Rahab didn't know the full meaning of these two words, the spies certainly did. And they pick up on Rahab's use of these two words, and they reply to her with the same chesed and emeth in response. This was an oath sworn in Yahweh's name. Therefore, his character must be seen in this, mustn't it? In the implementation of this oath. It's actually probably the first time any men have ever dealt kindly and truly with her. Her profession wouldn't have allowed men to have ever done that. And they did so willingly. Verse 15 says, then she let them down by a cord through the window. Now this word cord is the Hebrew word kebul. It means a twisted cord. It's a word used about Jeremiah being let down into the pit, that cord, okay? It had to be a strong rope. These are big guys. They just swum across the Jordan, all right? Strapping young men. So she had this rope and she let them down by the rope. And she says in verse 16, and she said unto the men, get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned. And afterward may you go your way. Now this is interesting because this is when James tells us that this was the action that demonstrated her faith was working. Hebrews 11 told us she had faith because she received the spies in peace. That had to be a faithful motivation. She didn't scream out. She didn't yell. James says that her faith was seen in her works when she sent the spies out another way. Faith and then works of faith. Hebrews and James use Rahab as their example for those two things. Isn't that remarkable? Alongside Abraham again in James. She was alongside Abraham in Hebrews, and now again she's alongside Abraham, the father of the faithful. And James says, I want to give another example, and he gives Rahab. And then the men in verse 17 give 3 conditions. 3 conditions by which the oath would be contingent. Number 1, the scarlet thread must stay in the window or be put in the window when we cross over. All her family must remain in the house, and she was not to reveal that the spies had been there. 3 conditions. So let's take those conditions. Number 1, the scarlet thread had to be in the window. Verse 18. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by. Now, this is a different word to the word cord back in verse 15. This is important to note because it's a different piece of material. It's not the rope here. This is the word tikvah. The Hebrew word tikvah is the word line, and we know that that means hope or expectation. Clearly, it's not the rope. If you left the rope in the window, when the king says, well, you can't find the spies, go and have a look and just see for any clues as to where the spies have been. And they go outside and they see the rope at Rahab's house, and they know she doesn't come down the rope. She goes down the stairs. What's that rope there for? It would have given the game away. It clearly wasn't the rope, okay? It was her hope. And I'm going to suggest that it was probably a piece of the linen flax or the material that she had that had been dyed red, and she was asked to put that in her window. A little bit, because she was on the wall, a little bit like she would do when she put the washing out, and it would just flap in the window, off the window ledge. A piece of red linen that could flap just there. Why? Well, these spies know that they were about to keep the Passover back over on the other side of Jordan. And so what they're doing is they're giving instructions on how Rahab and her family could participate. It's wonderful. This little list, this table, just shows how Rahab was actually going to enact the Passover with Israel on the other side of Jordan. She was to put a piece of scarlet thread in the window. Why a piece of scarlet thread? Well, the Israelites were going to put blood on their doorposts and lintels. Now, she couldn't put it on the door, she put it on the window. So window ledge, doorpost, she was showing the entrance into her house, there was blood. Rahab was to gather her entire family. Well, Exodus 12 says that the lamb was to be for the house of their fathers. The whole household was brought together. None were to leave the house. Well, in Exodus 12, none were to leave the house. Salvation was going to be through the destruction of the first city, Jericho. They didn't do that to any other city, did they? Well, salvation was going to be through the death of the firstborn in Exodus chapter 12. So Rahab kept the scarlet thread in her window while Israel held the Passover. She was symbolically identifying with them. Her heart was now with the God of Israel. She was really an Israelite inside this Gentile city of Jericho. In verse 20, they say, and if thou utter this our business, then we will be quits of thine oath which thou hast made us to swear. The promise is cancelled if you reveal this to anyone. So what does she say in verse 21? Oh, let me think about it. All right, give me a couple of days. There's no time, is there? And she said, according unto your words, so be it. Now, we know that Rahab became not only a mother in Israel, but we're doing this study because she becomes a mother in the line of Jesus Christ, doesn't she? Well, there was another woman who would be the mother of Jesus, who in Luke chapter 1 and verse 38, when the angel came and said these words about her giving birth to a Saviour, what did she say? Be it unto me according to thy word. Exactly the same. No hesitation. No, let me have time to think. Let me discuss it with Joseph. Straight away, immediately, she said, be it unto me according to thy word. She's borrowing the words of Rahab. And then it says at the end of verse 21, and she sent them away and they departed, and she bound the scarlet thread in the window. Now, she didn't have to do it straight away. She did have some time. She had to do it when they crossed over. But she does it straight away. She's going to display her faith straight away. There's no delay. She wants that to be there for all the Israelites to see when they come across. She's displaying her faith. Are you, brothers and sisters? Are you displaying your faith, modeling yourself on Rahab? Do people know what it is that you stand for? Have you identified with the house of Israel? With the people of God? She was. What an example. In verse 23, it says, so the two men returned and descended from the mountain and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun. They'd hid for 3 days, hadn't they? And they told him all things that befell him. What do you think they gave as a report? What were some of the things they could have said? Of all the things they could have said, look at verse 24. The only things they said was what they heard from Rahab. They just used her words. And they said to Joshua, truly Yahweh hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. That word faint is the same word as melt. They used Rahab's words. They trusted her. She had her finger on the pulse. They believed that. And they trusted her. But not only is she enacting the Passover, brothers and sisters, did you know that Rahab is also acting like Joshua? She is like Joshua in her house over there in Jericho. He was to be strong and of a good courage, we're told in Joshua chapter 1. Well, do you think she had courage? My word, she had. In the face of all of that treason, the threat of being beheaded, killed, pierced, she had courage. She was likewise. Joshua knew that God had given them the land. So did she. Joshua said that all the people of the earth might know the hand of Yahweh, that he is mighty. Rahab said, your terror is fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. In Joshua 24, he was going to go on and say, serve God with sincerity and truth. I do, he says in Joshua 24. I serve. He hasn't said these words yet. He's going to, at the end of the book of Joshua, serve God with sincerity and truth. And she uses those same two words, and she says, deal with me kindly and truly. They say we will. We will do exactly that. Those two words are brought together with Joshua and Rahab. He said, as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. The context being, he's the only God. We're not going to serve any other gods. We're only going to serve Yahweh. She said, Yahweh, your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. He's the only true God. And of course, we know that Joshua is a type of Jesus. So what are we being told? Rahab is an exact copy of Joshua in her family. In other words, she's being Jesus to her family. She's reflecting the character of Joshua in her household. That makes her the complete opposite to another character in this story. We haven't got time to really go into the details of this, but come over to chapter 7. Because remarkably, there's a contrast to all of what happens in chapter 2. The contrast is found in chapter 7. It's the story of Achan. And of course, Achan, we know, became tempted, and he saw, he coveted, he took. He was overcome with the treasures of the world and hid them in his tent and buried them there. And the whole nation suffered because of that. And 30 or so men died because of that. Have a look at this chart here. Look at the contrast between these two. They've been put in the record to show the opposite sides of faith. She was inwardly a daughter of Israel, wasn't she? That was in her heart. She'd been nursing that for many, many years, but it came out in the open to the two spies, but inwardly she was a daughter of Israel. Outwardly, he was one of the princes in Israel. Outwardly, though, she was a known harlot. She was a lover of men. Inwardly, he was a lover of money. So outwardly and inwardly, they are opposite, aren't they? She hid the messengers in her house. He hid the stolen goods in his tent. She confesses her faith. We just saw it in verse 9 to verse 11, right up front, bursting to say all of these things. She didn't wait. He confesses his sin at the very last. It gets down from tribe to families to households. He could have come up and said much, much earlier, Joshua, don't go through all this business. It's me. No. Waited. A bit like David with his sin with Bathsheba, which we'll look at in study 4. Waited. 9 months it took David. Well, it took right down to only Achan standing for Achan to confess. Contrast, you see. She caused her family to be saved. He caused his family to perish. He wasn't the only one stoned. The whole house was stoned. She ended up in Israel. He ended up like Jericho, a pile of stones. Jericho was flattened. It was just a pile of stones. He had a pile of stones on top of him. He ended up exactly the same. Here's the interesting thing. Have a look at Joshua chapter 7 and verse 1. Where does Achan come from in the story? What's his relationship to all of this? But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of Yahweh is kindled against the children of Israel. He was from Judah through Zerah. Who's Zerah? Well, we never had a chance yesterday to reach this. Just come back to Genesis 38. The story of Genesis 38 concludes with Tamar giving birth to two boys, twin boys. And there was an argument as to who was the firstborn. And they both had a claim to being the firstborn, didn't they? Many arguments probably around the tea table would have been about who came out first. Because one got their hand out first and the midwife put a scarlet thread on his hand. But he pulled it back. That was Zerah. But then the other boy burst over the top of Zerah. Zerah was trying to readjust himself in the birth canal. And before he had a chance, out came the second boy, Pharez. And Pharez means breach. And the midwife says, how did you do that? She's delivered many babies before. And she says, I've never seen anything like this. Burst himself out. And then out came Zerah a little bit later on. Sort of, don't know what happened there, you see. Rahab goes on to marry a man called Salmon. We believe he's one of the two spies. I know others suggest that maybe Achan was the other, but I can't see that myself, but that's irrelevant. Salmon, I think, definitely fits the bill. Where does Salmon come from? What family? What tribe? He comes from Judah. Through who? Through Pharez, the one who burst out, who put his faith out there. We don't have time to talk about the Scarlet thread. That's a whole another study in my Judah series, which maybe the kids might hear later on in the week. But the whole theme of Zerah and Pharez gets played out here. Who's the true firstborn? Who's the one who's going to be there for God? Now, Zerah and Phares were actually both faithful boys. There's no question about their morality. They are both found in Matthew chapter 1, remember. Of all the firstborns mentioned, Zerah and Phares are both mentioned because they both actually were firstborns. They were very faithful men. But to play the story out, one got a scarlet thread in Genesis 38. That was Zerah. He had a descendant called Achan, and Achan failed to display his faith. But Rahab enters into the house of Israel and she marries a man called Salmon from Phares and goes on to be in the line of the Lord. Clearly we're being told that the scarlet thread swapped lines from Zerah to Phares, all because of Rahab. Isn't that remarkable? Our stories actually tie in. We did Tamar yesterday, now it's Rahab. We're going to see links with Ruth later on, Bathsheba. They're all tied in together. And I don't know whether this gets touched on in your Hosea studies or not this week, but it's interesting that in Hosea chapter 2, we have this description of the valley of Achan, the valley of trouble, being turned into a wonderful door of hope. And it was a valley of trouble. He ended up, Achan did, as a pile of stones. He was in so much trouble. But it turned out to be a wonderful door of hope, didn't it? Or window, maybe we should say, of hope. Tikvah to Rahab. Isn't that just an amazing story? Such drama, such daring, such faith. A little girl that grew up unable to squash the gnawing reality of the God of Israel, and that went on to act in accordance with her heart at the moment of crisis. She stood tall in her faith, displayed it for all to see. And so that is why she is mentioned by Matthew in his gospel and finds herself in the lineage of the Messiah.